Welcome to the Underscore Transformation Podcast. My name's Jason West.
And my name's Joe Ailes.
And together we're the founders of Underscore. In Season 2, we're focusing on implementation and the challenges that surround making changes to policies, processes, systems, and team structures. If you'd like to know more about scoping a transformation program, please take a listen to Season 1. This week is the second part of our deep dive into testing. In part 1, we discussed how testing covers a lot more than just systems, the value that an experienced test manager brings, and we took a look at test strategy and its contents. We also covered how to construct a really effective test plan and how important it is to keep that updated throughout your implementation. And then we got into the various different types of testing: smoke, unit, performance, security, UAT, and the like. So we covered a lot of ground. It was a big topic, and we're not quite finished with testing just yet. So there really is a lot going on in testing. And next we need to figure out how we're going to coordinate all this activity. Any new ERP or HCM system throws up hundreds, possibly thousands of design enhancements and defects that need fixing. So how do you keep a track of all this activity when you've got process owners demanding changes, test teams identifying defects, and functional consultants running around making changes all over this new system that you're implementing? How do you deal with that, Joe?
Well, Jason, good question. The first thing you need is a robust defect management system and management process, really. So this is a process whereby any defects or enhancements that you inevitably are going to find during testing, you're going to record somewhere, review their severity, and categorize these issues, assign them to a functional consultant or a functional consultant, of course, to solve the technical issue, or a process owner for resolution in terms of policy and process and so on. And one of the things that you are going to continually do through your project is, as you identify issues, you apply these fixes, and then you have to regression test those. In fact,
we did a whole lot of definitions around different types of testing, and in the last one of it, we didn't cover regression testing, did we? We should probably cover that, really, hadn't we?
Yeah, we perhaps should talk a little bit about what that means, because that is a term that is going to become all very familiar when a system's even in production, because it is something that organizations are going to have to get used to doing. So, simply regression testing is you're testing areas of the product that have been tested before, but now because you're applying a change or an enhancement to an area of a system, you're going to have to go back and retest some of those functional areas.
Yeah, and so it's what you would do on a live system, isn't it?
Absolutely. And technology, software as a service technology, will tend to update itself every 3 to 6 months, and the technology suppliers, those vendors, will naturally and rightly so will encourage organizations to have regression testing processes in place, because they're applying enhancements to and adding new features to the existing technology and existing functional areas of their system. That organizations are going to have to test how is that new feature going to fit into my system, and ultimately making sure that new feature isn't going to break anything that you've designed and developed previously.
Yeah, so one of the biggest areas to test in when you're doing your regression testing is often in reporting and in integrations, because that tends to be where things most often break and could be really quite serious if it's an integration if they break that.
It could be security, it could be as well, because you might be making changes to a particular business process, for instance, that requires certain roles to approve stuff or see stuff, and all of a sudden, guess what? They can't see it because the security is not there. So you're going to have to make changes to security policy to allow those individuals to see those bits and those features, and by enabling that security on that user, you may inadvertently be opening up a whole load of security visibility of the system to that user that you hadn't really intended to. There's an awful lot to think about when you had an enhancement or a new feature onto something that's been tested thoroughly. And so, paying attention to regression testing is really important. And that's why having enhancements and additional features quite close to go live is quite dangerous, because actually you've not had the time to really thoroughly test and probably regression test everything that you need to test before you turn the system on. So word of warning to anybody out there: if you've got enhancements that are or good ideas prior to go live, how close are you to go live? Because you've got to really drive regression testing through the system to make sure that you haven't inadvertently broken something prior to go live.
Yeah.
So that's really important.
No, absolutely. So back on the defect management side, we've got this process where we're identifying lots of things that need to change. Some of them are defects, some of them are enhancements, and there's this process of reviewing those, categorizing them, putting a severity on them, and then feeding them to the right people. So it's the triage process, of what we refer to as triage within testing. So who is it that should be owning that? Where does that sit in the program structure?
Typically, it should be the test manager that owns the triage process. And they're owned by the customer first and foremost. It's not the technology vendor. Bugs and issues and importance of those bugs and issues are categorized by the customer, because ultimately it's this particular issue has this much impact on my system and my user experience, and this is how much I care about that issue. So that's really important, and it's all coordinated and controlled by the test manager, and the accountability, I guess, of fixing those issues should be the process owners for each of their respective functional areas.
Yeah.
So they're the ones that are, I guess, prioritizing how important this issue is for me to get fixed. And it could be a technology issue, and we this is much broader than technology. I know we're focusing a lot on technology because this is language that's typically used within systems implementations, but we mustn't forget that any form of transformation is not just about system implementation. It's people, it's policy, it's process, it's technology, it's culture, it's a whole bunch of different things that the process owner should be held to account for.
Yeah. So that whole triaging piece, it's really important that the test manager or the person that's owning this is where their depth of understanding of the technology really comes to the fore, because they're able to make distinctions between, no, that is actually a defect that needs to be investigated. No, that's actually an enhancement. You've changed what you've designed, so that there's differences in those. But also, actually, it was just a training issue. Or hold on, we've got a problem here with policy or process. We need to get that to the right people, and being able to kind of understand all that and push it to the right people is what a really great test manager brings to your program.
Absolutely. If a test manager without experience in a technology becomes it just becomes more of a test coordinator, to be honest. Someone who tracks issues and pushes the issues, signpost where issues are meant to go, but doesn't really understand the impact of the issue, and isn't really able to articulate across a number of stakeholders the importance of having that fixed. So it then puts an awful lot of pressure on process owners to be able to articulate back to the technology vendor, for instance, technical nuances within the system and how to get the system to do what it needs to do. And again, one of the other things that a test manager with solid experience in the technology would do is not waste the time of technical consultants to triage things that actually are not possible within the technology. They'll quickly be able to sort of filter out and triage points that says, actually, you know what you're asking isn't technically possible within this product. So let's not waste the precious time of technical consultants and let them focus on what they need to focus, which is fixing real issues rather than investigating or answering almost mute points, really. So they'll play, having a test manager with plenty of experience will be beneficial to both the customer as well as the those system implementers and the system integrators, etc.
Yeah, and they need to have sometimes quite robust conversations with people where you have somebody and I've been this person go, but it's rubbish. This is just rubbish. Why is it doing that? This is a bug. It needs fixing. The test manager will say, no, that's just a feature of the system that you bought.
Yes.
Find a way around it.
Developer, create a workaround. You're asking for you're asking for a unicorn, and unicorns don't exist, as far as I'm aware.
Who knows in these times? Who knows? So there's a lot that's going on here, and so how do you keep track of all of that?
I would really recommend not keeping it, not tracking it on Post-it notes.
Probably a good start.
Or Excel spreadsheets. Really, I mean, most organizations will have some sort of case management system that they will use, and really, you need to start with that. Speak to your IT functions. They will have a product that they will use to track defects and issues and an issue resolution system. They'll have a Jira, a ServiceNow,
or an extension of something more specific, whether it's Bugzilla or that sort of thing. There's lots of stuff out there.
Lots of systems, and actually, in many cases, the system implementers, those that are sitting there configuring your system, will probably have one of their own. And this becomes really the one version of the truth as far as what issues are we dealing with and how and which ones do we prioritize. And you keep a log and you use this as almost as your change control document at the very end of the implementation. I said, okay, these were my design requirements. I've made some design changes, which I've updated my design specifications, etc., along the way, and there have been some enhancements issues that we have fixed over time, and you extrapolate all of that, and that becomes your change control documentation as well.
Yeah,
and of course, meanwhile, you're still updating process flows and et cetera, with the changes you're making along the way. You're making changes to target operating model, potentially. You're changing roles and responsibilities, and all of that will have to be maintained. But documenting things documenting all of these issues and defects, enhancements, et cetera, in a system where you're able to easily export and extract that data, and keeping it somewhere. Stored somewhere as your change control document is good practice.
Yes, and keeping a record of the business rationale behind why these changes were made.
Yes,
it can be so easy to go round and round in circles on something. And you can waste time, and you can make some really great decisions at the time that make absolute sense. That even post go live, you look back on it and go, "Why on earth did we do that?"
I mean, keeping decision logs, keep your decision logs of these. This is gold dust, because you will be live for 3-6 months, and somebody will ask you the question. Okay, so tell me why you've designed something like that, and especially if the process owner is no longer around. You've got the thinking is in that process owner's head as to why they've designed a policy, a process, or the TOM in a certain way. You need to have that documented to be able to refer to it. Absolutely, you can make changes, and the world changes and the things evolve when you're in production. We absolutely encourage every single organization to continually to optimize what you've got. But you need to have that solid baseline. Okay, this is what we've made a decision based on the information we had, and these are the set of decisions we've made, and this is why we've designed what we've designed.
Yeah. But the accountability for tracking that sits with the client, not the system implementer.
Always.
Yeah,
I don't know if in years gone by with on-premise implementations, a lot of that might have sat. The responsibility for that might have sat with our technology provider. Perhaps I'm sure our listeners will probably tell us whether that's the case or not. But yeah, no, in software as a service deployments, the ones that we've experienced over the years, it's always been the client's responsibility to make sure that this happens.
So whilst it's fine to use your system implementation partner's defect tracking tool during the project, if you don't have a suitable one available, you really do need to sort out one of your own by the time you go live, because otherwise, what are you going to do with this information? You'll output it to an Excel spreadsheet and it kind of dies a death. And that ongoing governance and control process and systems are going to be essential to maintaining and continuing to develop this new product and all the processes and policies that are attached to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Over the course of what will be many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And IT organizations, IT functions have vetted these for years. So if the IT function, I mean, we talked previously about the right structure for these programs and how perhaps some software as a service technology providers are trying to almost keep the IT function at arm's length, and trying to sell directly to the functional heads, the finance, the CFOs, and the CPOs, etc. But actually, we always talked about making sure that the IT function are integrated into the project and have a role in the project, and the IT function should be providing infrastructure, tools, and processes that they've used for years around change control, configuration control, etc. They've got an awful lot of those processes already there. So leverage that during your project, and the triage process that the IT function will have may be appropriate, may not for your project. So, but speak to IT. Absolutely speak to IT. They've got tons and tons of experience in this space, and you actually, when you're going through your governance structure, talking the language that the organization already understands in terms of triage, defect management, prioritizing. How do you prioritize an issue? How do you categorize the issue? If you're using language that the IT function understands, and ultimately the business understands, it just puts you in a little bit of a better position.
Yeah, if your IT function has 1 to 4 ranking of priority. If it has 1 to 3, if it has A, B, C, just use it.
Use that. Yes. Don't come up with something new. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't come up with something new and upset your CIO. So
and on that kind of that people element of it, I'm sure we've covered it in a previous podcast, but just a word of advice for any sponsor is just keep checking in with your CIO colleague on the board, and just make sure that they're hearing good things from their team, that your program manager is talking to the right people in the IT function, and that they're working together as a properly integrated team. If the CIO is nervous, if they're seeing that their team are being kept away or kept in the dark, or this kind of finance or HR project is kind of just off doing its own thing, and not using any of our pre-existing processes and systems and those sorts of things, that's a worrying sign, and you need to make sure that your program manager's not kind of building a wall around their program and kind of repelling all borders, because we've seen that happen, and it doesn't end well.
No, because ultimately when the product goes into operation, the IT function will play a probably bigger role than they would have done during implementation, because all of a sudden you've got users trying to access systems and print documents from it, and And you do not want the CIO to say, "Well, thanks very much. I don't know anything about this, but now I'm having a problem that I need to deal with."
Yeah.
You don't want to be a CPO or a CFO in that space. So IT function are absolutely integral to the success of any program. So they have to be integrated without doubt.
Yes, yeah.
You're listening to the Underscore Transformation Podcast, your practical guide to business transformation. To find out more, visit underscore-group.com.
In fact, that's probably a handy hint. If you're in a position where you're hiring a program manager to come in and run this program for you, alongside your transformation lead, absolutely take references on them from the people that they give you, their CFO or CPO or whoever they were directly working for, or that kind of head of the function. But also speak to the CIO of that business and just kind of check it out. So how did the relationship work? It could save you an awful lot of heartache if you don't do that cross check with at least the CIO. If you're implementing new technology, it would make absolute sense to do that. So on these kind of people aspects of testing, you require a lot of input from multifunctional test teams in end-to-end testing and user acceptance testing. And these are people that are drawn from across the business, different business units, different geographies, countries, whatever it may be. You need to test this thing in multiple different ways because it's going to get used in very different ways in different places. So deciding who's going to test in each phase is something that really does require quite a lot of careful consideration. And we touched on some of that in the last episode.
Yes.
But just to build on that everyone that's involved in testing should be absolutely clear about what their roles and responsibilities are during these various test phases.
Yes.
And you've got to make sure that they're trained before testing begins. Because otherwise it's just like wading through treacle because they don't understand what's in front of them.
And actually it becomes really ineffective. And there is a danger that the first time the organization get their hands on the system to test it for the first time, having had the sort of design workshops and the system integrator have gone away and done some beautiful things with the system, configured it the way those as per the specifications in the design workshops, and then the customer gets given access to the system to test that first that first prototype, that first iteration of that design. And there is there's a very short window in which to test, right? So these things are typically implemented, 7, 8, 9 months. So you don't have a lot of time to do lots and lots of testing. So maybe you're looking potentially a sort of 3 or 4 week unit testing window the first time you get your hands on it. And we talked about the definitions of different testing last week. If your team isn't ready, isn't technically able to sort of jump straight in and start identifying the issues from the go, you will end up spending 1 to 3 weeks for people to get them making themselves familiar with the system.
Yes.
And then ultimately unit testing will have disappeared, will have gone by, and then the individuals will start to become more and more familiar with the system towards what we call end-to-end testing. And it's at this point that they start to identifying an awful lot of issues and defects and enhancements. And the system integrators hate it because it's at this stage the system should be ready to go live. Why are we making so many changes? And the reason we're making so many changes is because actually unit testing wasn't effective because people didn't know what they were doing. People weren't trained. People didn't know what they were testing. And we talked last week about having the difference between scripts and scenarios. If you're having to give somebody a script because it means they don't understand the technology and they don't know what they're doing. So if you give them a scenario, I want you to test a purchasing process or
add a new supplier to the system,
Exactly.
raise the first purchase requisition, send it for approval, raise a purchase order.
If I'm having to train, if you don't know how to conduct the simple business processes and simple those tests, it means that I'm going to have to spend an awful lot of time training you during that unit testing window, and time will have gone by. So actually, forget about that. Make sure that people are trained prior to them getting their hands on it.
Yeah, and that's training on the system, the test process, their role. But I think mindset's really important, isn't it? To a really good test team, they've got a particular mindset, don't they?
Yeah, they've got to be interested in breaking it and take pride in it. Oh, you've given me a shiny new process. Let me see if I can tear this apart. Yeah. They're not being disruptive or destructive. They need to go in with okay, this needs to land well across the organization. So it needs to be foolproof and it needs to work really, really well. So they need to understand what. Again, one of the other areas actually is they need to be involved in those design workshops. They need to understand what was the rationale for making those design decisions, and what was the rationale for creating those business logic, that business logic in process, policy, etc. So then when I get my hands on it, I will try to come up with testing sort of scenarios and execution of tests that actually might go against some of those design decisions we've made. Yeah. So if you've created I will send for anything for over $1 million or £1 million. We'll go for approval of X. So I'm now going to make sure that I test that, and I want to make sure that if I send it for £900,000, will it still go to that approval or not? It's that type of mindset that you need to have.
Yeah. Now, I think there's probably something we should just cover off before we close out on this piece on testing. Hopefully, we've provided a relatively in-depth. Now, it wasn't meant to be in-depth. It was meant to be a fairly high-level introduction, but I guess we're just like talking about testing.
Yeah, it's important. We've seen so many projects fail, Jason, haven't we? Because
absolutely
not enough attention was paid to it.
Yeah, you've got to test it.
Yeah.
So given that we're in this strange new world where we can't get teams together right now to put them in a room and spend a week or two testing something, where you've got your process owners there, you've got functional consultants there, you've got your test manager all there answering questions, dealing with stuff in the room, what with people that have got live system projects now that are still continuing, and they're kind of looking at this kind of test sessions coming up. What are the main considerations people need to think about, and what advice can we give them at this early stage as we're all kind of getting to grips with this now?
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the programs I'm leading right now, actually, we've managed to mobilize virtual testing. So. Which has been interesting. I mean, this situation we're in now, and depending on when you're listening to this podcast, obviously COVID-19 has impacted an awful lot of organizations, people, etc.
Yeah, this is the 31st of March, 2020, and we based in the UK right now, so we're on lockdown.
We're on lockdown. We're doing this podcast remotely as well. So. We've launched some testing activities virtually. So the way we've organized it, actually, we brought the process owners onto a virtual meeting this morning using Microsoft Teams.
Yeah.
Gone through the scenarios that we expect them to perform. These are the tests that we need the teams to do, and actually we've set they've gone off on their own, and we're having regular daily checkpoints to make sure that we're on track of against the plan. So ideally you'd like to have people in a room and bouncing ideas off each other. So the channel of communication is still open. So we're keeping the chat going. So people are bouncing queries off each other. And if there are particular issues, we'll quickly jump on on a quick call to just address. We talked a bit about triage, and just do a quick triage on a particular issue that the individuals might have come across, to unblock it and allow it to move on. So there are. This is perhaps the new reality of deploying programs now, where we're having to rely much more on virtual working.
And frankly, we've done this enough times in the past on global projects. You just have
normal.
You have virtual teams because they can't all be in one place at one time.
Exactly. Training becomes much more important in this virtual way of working, because if you don't have the support of someone sat there by your side, they can just look over your shoulder and provide you a bit of steer and guidance on something you're doing. So so if you're doing virtual testing, requires more discipline from individuals, making sure that things get executed in a timely manner, because everything is time bound with these programs. We don't have infinite amount of time, like we talked about before. We've got 3 to 4 weeks for each window of testing at best, and individuals need to be pretty effective. So training is key. Having that right mindset is key. As well as having good coordination and strong coordination from a test manager who frankly know what they're doing.
And having that kind of virtual facilitation of the group and keeping that going throughout the days of the testing, and keeping everybody connected, and you have to kind of over communicate in these situations to make sure that you don't end up with people kind of going off in weird directions.
Totally.
It's all doable. You might need
doable.
to allow a little bit more time perhaps in your plan to take into account that this is now virtual, and that you just might need a little bit more space to get this stuff done. But training really important, as you said, mindset. And I think that's probably a good place to draw to a close on this, because we've talked about testing an awful lot, because it is really important. We covered off previously that the importance of getting the right test manager in, strategy, test plans, all the different types of testing. We've covered off, the team, who to get involved, how to run things virtually. We've covered the defect management process. We've talked a lot about testing. So let's look forward now to next week, where we'll be talking about governance and control during this implementation phase, during the build phase of your transformation. And what we had planned was some roundtable discussions on the broad topic of these 10 key success factors from our build checklist. That's quite difficult to do now, given that we can't really sensibly put a lot of people in a room together. So we are going to focus more in some future episodes on how to deliver a transformation program in a virtual world, where everybody is working 100% remotely, and some of the practical guidance and advice on how to make that work. So that will be coming up, and we'll be inviting our head of leadership development, Lucy Finney, onto the podcast. So we'll be doing that in the next couple of weeks. So listen out for that, and we will catch you next week, where we'll talk about governance and control.
Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. So this episode focused on 1 of 10 critical success factors in the build phase of transformation. If you'd like to be at the front of the queue for next week's episode, please hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to like the show if you found it useful. If you have any questions or opinions you'd like to share, please contact us, so Joe Ailes or Jason West on LinkedIn, or via our website _-group.com.